Welcome to Culture Starts With You, a podcast all about culture and core values. Today we've got an amazing guest with Jeff Albright. He is the current president of Yanmar North America. Super excited to have him on. I've known him for about 3 years. We share the same favorite drink, which is a Captain and Diet. So we have a lot in common already. So Jeff, welcome to the show, and super glad you were able to make it work.
Happy to be here. Honored to be asked to be on the podcast.
All right, so one of the first questions I like to ask, just to kind of break the ice a little bit, is when you wake up in the morning and you have your commute, you park your car, or you get out of your bed, you walk to your desk or work from home, what would be your walk-up song or entrance song playing in your head every morning?
So this was a tough one. So I actually came up with 4, probably rotating.
All right, fire.
So Shining Star by Earth, Wind & Fire, No Alibis, Eric Clapton, Let's Groove, another Earth, Wind & Fire song, and Can't Stop the Feeling with Justin Timberlake, which is just those 4 seem to be rotating in my head. With a person with a short attention span, that tends to be the case. Things change a lot.
And these would change based on your what you had to do that day, your attitude, what would drive that?
Yeah, exactly. Depending on what's going on the day, if reminding yourself that you can do it is Shining Star. Remind yourself that you have to get it done even if you don't want to. That's No Alibis, and Let's Groove and Can't Stop the Feeling are just when things are going good, you feel like going in. So those are the kind of things that, and actually sometimes that is on my playlist as well, so it helps.
Love it. All right, ice has been broken. Okay, so for the audience, let's just first start with, obviously this is all about culture and core values, but first just tell us a little bit about your journey. How'd you get to the seat you're in today? And you've got a great one because you've been all over the globe. So I think that people are really going to enjoy just your colorful past.
Sure. From Iowa City, Iowa. I went to Iowa City West High, go Trojans. We went to Michigan State undergrad, and just by chance decided I would study Japanese. So I was a finance and Japanese major. Ended up spending a year in Japan during college. Liked it enough, but also liked it enough that I wanted to go back. But I realized that my Japanese wasn't good enough for me to really say I could do business in Japanese. So decided to go back and spent 3 years working there, actually as a salesperson. So I had a finance major. I'd spent a summer working at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, but ended up never going into finance really. And I think my career is been one that's been mostly typified by right place, right time, and willingness to raise my hand. So I came back from Japan, got married to my wife, and she had a job in Milwaukee. I went along with her. And Briggs & Stratton happened to be looking for somebody who spoke Japanese who could help them with a joint venture they had. And I raised my hand and said yes. And then 6 years after I started there, I ended up running the joint venture. They said, who wants to go to China? And I raised my hand and said, I'll go. And so we moved to Shanghai. We're there for over 6 years. Actually, I've been through 2 pandemics. So I was living in China when SARS hit. So this is my second one. I like to say I'm an expert at pandemics. Actually, this one's been a lot harder than the first one. And then another opportunity came up, and a private equity company was looking for somebody to run a company in Malaysia. And again, I thought the opportunity was right. I was the right guy at the right time. They were specifically looking for an American who had international experience, and I fit the bill and ended up running as a global CEO of a company based out of Malaysia for 3 years, and ended up moving back to the U.S. and becoming the president of a company in Cedar Rapids, Iowa called ESP International, which is an ESOP. Along the way, I got 2 graduate degrees. I have a Master's of Science in Engineering Management from Milwaukee School of Engineering and an EMBA from Kellogg School of Business. So I like to learn. I like to learn new things. I like to talk with other business leaders. And so that's why one of the reasons I joined a group called YPO. Good chance to compare notes and talk with people about how they do things, and learn new ways to execute on business plans. And that's just kind of put me in the position. And then this job came available. Yanmar's a $8 billion global privately held company based out of Japan, and they were looking for somebody to run North America, which is total sales around $700 million and about 1,000 employees. And kind of everything in my life pointed towards that. It was I speak Japanese and been in this kind of business. And so I just say more than, I think the old saying in golf is I'd rather be lucky than good. And I think that's probably been the tagline for my career, is being lucky and good. Right person, right time.
I know you're being really humble and saying lucky and good, but I mean, hearing you tell that story really kind of walks you through this journey of every one of those experiences really kind of prepped you for your current role that you're in to be a very ideal candidate for exactly what they were looking for. Fair enough. Yeah.
And I think the other thing about that is, and I want to highlight what I said before, is I really do ascribe a lot of the last 10 years of success and even before that is good mentors, good colleagues, and having a network of people to talk to, a network of people to call and say, hey, how do you do this? If I want to go from point A to point B, how did you do it? And cut down on the learning curve at least. And then also, it's been a great source of resources that make me look smart. And so having that willingness to explain and talk to other people about what you're trying to solve for has really helped me be better. And I think that's also, and I'm going into trying to dominate an interview, but I think that's also where a lot of new managers make the mistake. A lot of people get stymied in their career because they think they're supposed to know everything. And I'm at least smart enough to know that I don't know everything.
Even in your intro, we'll dive into this more later, but just describing your learning path, your self-development path is get better every day. That's one of the big things that we preach at Spinny Tech, and you definitely are illustrating that. So, all right. So you're in an interesting situation because you don't have just a corporate culture, but you also literally have cultures that you're blending together. So what do culture and core values mean to you? And I want you to reflect from young Jeff entering the workforce and how you viewed it to all the way to today and how you maybe view it and likely view it differently. And then I think the added element for you is the international part for a Japanese-based company in the U.S. and melding all that into your corporate culture as well.
Yeah, so I mean, when I started off in working world, I started with a really small company. It was 15 of us, and it's easy to form a good or bad culture there. However, when I got out, everybody thinks they know how things are supposed to work, especially when you're a 20-something-year-old person. And what I learned really quickly was that wasn't the culture I thought a company should have. The culture I joined into, I saw what I didn't like about it. I didn't know how you do it differently. And I think that was the big difference between now and then. At least I've had the experience to know what hasn't worked and what has worked. The things that have helped drive positive behaviors and aligned behaviors, more importantly. Back then, it wasn't aligned. There was a lot of infighting, a lot of behind-the-scenes complaining, but not a lot of direct discussions. And then I joined Briggs & Stratton, and I had the opportunity to join a company that was at that time, 90 years old. We had really strong leaders, and they were on top of their game. In the last few years, they've run into trouble, but that generation of senior leadership was really incredible. And I got to learn a lot. I learned a lot about how you manage and how you build a culture of pride in what we do, but also a common goal set. And as we came into, I had the opportunity to work overseas, and when I was in China for Briggs & Stratton, I had Japan under me. We had an operation in the Philippines as well as China, and melding all those cultures together. I think one of the things that I learned from my MBA class was that, a company like IBM or Disney says, we're agnostic as to who you are, where you came from, ethnicity, whatever it might be. But when you walk in those doors, you behave like somebody from Disney. You behave like somebody from IBM. And so as you start to think about that, who do you want to be when people come in the door? What is it, the norms that we set? And that's really important. I've learned along the way is you set those expectations for behaviors up front, and you have to be unwielding and about that. And it's not a compromise that you can make. there's no compromise you can make around that, because once you do, then you start to get people. Everybody starts to go in their own way. And so, when I joined Yanmar, for one of the first things I did was realize that we have corporately we have 11 guiding principles that very few people could repeat more than 2 of. And so if you're going to boil it down to something, it has to be something everybody can remember, everybody can repeat. It has to be something that people have in the back of their head on a daily basis. Because what it really becomes to me is core values and culture. Core values build that culture, informs you on a daily basis who we expect you to be at work and how we expect you to behave. And it's our North Star. If we have a decision to go right or left, what would those core values inform you to do? And when we came up with really simple, it's 4 P's: people, partner, product, and passion. So we treat people with respect, regardless whether they're inside or outside the company. We treat them as we would want to be treated. We partner with people to get things done. We know that we can't, as I mentioned before, we can't know everything. We can't be everywhere. So we got to work together, whether it be from top down or sideways, whatever it might be. We all have to work together. Product. We make the world's best product. We got to keep that up, and we got to make sure that's who we are, and that's how we define ourselves. And the last thing is passion. We're from the I'm from the Midwest. Marc's from the Midwest. To me, the adage that my one of my coaches said to me a long time ago was that we don't have to be the most talented. We have to work the hardest. We have to out prepare the competition, and I think that's what every company has to really understand, is if you really want to outclass, it's not just about hiring the best people. It's about making sure that everybody comes to work with passion. Because if you get up in the morning and you really don't want to be there, don't come, because you're not going to bring your A game, and I don't care how talented or what degree you have. And so when people understand that we're going to treat each other fairly, we're going to work together, and it's really about passion. It doesn't matter what degrees or what little letters you put at the end of your name. It's, are you bringing it every day, and that will get rewarded.
So you had several really good nuggets in there. A couple things I wrote down I want to steal from you and use.
Okay.
Behave like Disney, or behave like whatever culture you're walking into. Like, that's an amazing thing to, like, I always talk about, what's your Notre Dame sign you tap before you walk onto the field every morning, and that's a great one to have in your mind. And then I love too I've applied this myself. It's what not to do. Sometimes we learn more from the mistakes of others we've witnessed from, so you know what not to model from a culture perspective, a corporate culture perspective. And so that's, I think, a really important one. I was fortunate enough to visit your corporate headquarters in Georgia this past April. A couple of things I just wrote down I thought was interesting parlay on this is, you have I think you referred to it as the helmet sticker program. Mm-hmm. You had some video boards overviewing people. Talk about a couple of those programs that you've done, and that's really a direct relation to teamwork and culture, in my opinion. So dive into those if you can.
Yeah, as organizations get bigger, one of the challenges, you start to lose track of who's who, right? And I'll always say, everybody's braver in this digital world when they're digital, right? Or Zoom. If you can't see the person, can't see their facial reactions, you're going to say a lot bolder things in email. And especially if you don't have a personal relationship. So one of the video board ideas is basically every person, when they get hired, has essentially a walk-up video that you would play if they were, and it has their name, it shows where they're from, what they do, and a little tidbit about them. And it's a little long, it's 30 seconds, so you're a little uncomfortable staying there for 30 seconds. But it rotates, there's a number of them out in the building, and it rotates. So you get to know people and know a little bit about them. That's the first thing. And that kind of creates a little bit of a bond for everybody. At least you can't say, I'd never seen them before, because you'll see it rotate. The second piece to that is, if you think about core values and you think about communications, one of the things I failed to mention when I was young, what I observed was, the worst thing a company can do is talk about stuff and not follow up. Talk about stuff and not have leadership do it. If the leadership's not going to, so how many programs do you go through where you do it and it's one and done, everybody gets excited, And at Briggs, we had that bad habit of doing some things like that. Diversity training. We did it once. It was expensive, so we didn't want to do it again. And we had this thought process back at ESP with my previous company was, how do you create this reward cycle so people representing the behaviors get recognized? And as managers, it's really not that genuine for us to walk around and hand out little stickers to people. People say, what am I, in elementary school? However, a colleague saying, hey, thanks for doing that. You really showed passion, or you really showed really a good partner. That's powerful. And good deeds or recognition begets the same behaviors. If you want to, the most powerful reinforcement is positive reinforcement. So how do you get people to give each other positive reinforcement? And so we created a little helmet sticker that represents each one of the 4 Ps, and a system, actually using our learning management system, people can go in and give fellow colleagues recognitions. And for the 12 months we've been doing it, over 3,000 have been issued, colleague to colleague. Now, I give some to people. I've given maybe 100 to people. And what I ask people when we talk about it is, I say, if it's a 5 o'clock on a Friday and you need help, otherwise you're stuck there all night, why would your colleagues stay for you? When it's not their job, they're not going to get in trouble for not doing it. Why would they stay for you if they don't think that you're going to appreciate it? And how do you show appreciation other than thank you? You can. It's so simple, and it doesn't cost much. But they put it up, and Marc, you saw it. People display them on their cubicles. They display them on their walls because, it's a source of pride. Now, we had people come to us and say, well, that's not fair because I don't have any. Well, just do something that represents the 4 Ps. You go out of your way. That's the whole point. Go out of your way to do something that builds, and it builds on itself. So it's been a really positive program. As we looked at helping change the culture here at Yanmar, it's a good way. And now everybody inherently knows what the 4 Ps are because they're interacting with them every day.
I love that. So one of the problems you identified earlier was that you had 11 principles, guiding principles, and you boiled that down in essence to 4 that people can actually remember, and you're doing something to reinforce the actions and activities behind that, which really drives the culture and the core values to be just, I always like to say it's a part of our DNA. What's our cultural DNA that we're driving every single day? And so that's amazing. I applaud you for that. And I remember I wrote that down. I think I took some pictures when I was there. I actually wrote down an additional note for us of how maybe we could apply that at Spinning Tech. So that's great. Okay, so thinking about getting better every day, because that's part of, I think every person you interview, we hear this all the time. What's your training program? What do you do to get better and learn more? You're just naturally a lifelong learner, but how do you encourage your team, your leadership team, which then encourages the others to get better every day and keep pushing that boundary for themselves?
I have a conversation. So again, lucky to be mentored. I'll digress a short bit. So one of my mentors early on was a guy named Mike Hamilton. He was a senior VP of sales at Briggs. He was from England, and he had been around the world and seen a lot of different things and helped me really understand how to better yourself. And one of the things is, he has 2 brothers. One's a journalist and one's an author who's written a lot of books and things like that. And Mike was always recommending books and always talking about new technology and always showing that you have to keep advancing yourself because business changes and the techniques change. And so the other thing he encouraged all of us to do is get out and build a network. As I mentioned before, build a network of people, professors, whoever it is that you have to talk to, you can call and connect with, and whether that be nowadays LinkedIn or other places, have that group of people that you can talk to. So my philosophy when I tell my team is, as you progress up in the ranks, if you really want to go up to a certain level, it gets lonelier as you go up, right? There's very few people around you, or as you get higher in a company, and the number of things, the amount of direct dialogue you can have gets limited. Just by nature of, there's certain things you can't share with everybody. There's certain things you can't share at home. There's certain things. So who do you talk to? How do you learn things? How do you do things? How do you show vulnerability and those things that you may not be able to do with your employees? And that's through things like, continuing education. That's going to classes where you have like-minded people who aren't going to affect your daily work, but they're willing to share and they have experiences they can share with you. It's going to groups like YPO. It's getting out in the community and understanding other people in the community. So part of what I did in China is I joined the American Chamber of Commerce, and I ended up being on their board. And I ran for a while the Manufacturers Business Council, which we sat together every month and talk shop. What are you doing about, the Chinese government? What are you doing about the customs officials? What do you do about, bribery attempts? Those kind of things. It was useful. Otherwise, you're trying to solve for it by yourself, and there's people around you who can help you. And so, long-winded way of saying, if you want to be a leader, you got to recognize that you're going to have a network of people. You're going to have to make it. It has to really be your passion, because those interactions happen outside of work, right? Those interactions, and you got to be willing to say, hey, you have a similar experience to me. Do you want to talk shop, right? If you want to just drop everything and walk out the door and not think about work, then that's fine. There's a place for you in every organization, just not that senior position, because the senior positions, it's a full-time job, and that means 7 days a week.
How do you, so for you yourself,
yeah,
how do you separate that time? I mean, it is lonely at the top.
Yep.
It's hard to turn that mind off. I know you and I's mind, we work very similarly. So how do you take that mental vacation? How do you turn it off at night, on the weekends? You've got family that are active in sports and stuff,
yep.
Younger. How do you separate that?
I don't do it very well. I don't do it very well. I'll admit that. Having said that, I think it's really about focusing, trying to be in the moment, which is hard. It's about doing your best to get distractions and not checking your phone every 30 seconds because somebody's supposed to be getting back to you. But when work is your passion, is one of your passions, you got to make sure you make time for those other things like family and friends and stuff. So I do my best not to take my phone with me if I don't have to, or keep it on silent so I don't get distracted. But it's always an evolving process, but I also make sure the important events I get to. I commute to Atlanta, but I was at every football game where my daughter, who's on the dance team, danced at. I went to 60-70% of my other daughter's volleyball games. I took her, took them out of town to different things. Took my other daughter on a college visit. Make time to do those things, because there's always going to be another reading. There's always going to be a reason that you can't get involved in that part of life, and it goes too fast. So I do make that time. It's just making sure that you're there when you're there.
Right. Okay, so now balancing that with, as a leader in the position, you set the tone for some norms as well with communication and hours worked. How do you feel about, do you delay send emails? Do you send an email late at night? Your actions can send a message, a good one and a bad one. What do you do personally to try to not send or create bad habits of other leaders for your organization?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about norms, and we talk a lot about expectations, and we talk a lot about the focus is on getting the job done. It's not about FaceTime. It's not about mimicking me or mimicking my behaviors. If I'm a light sleeper and I'm going to send an email at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., that doesn't mean I'm expecting a response. What it means is I'm trying to get it on paper before I forget it. So, having said that, my expectations of leadership is that, and of the organization, is that we focus on getting stuff done when we said we get it done. And I'm a big believer in Rockefeller habits, which is a very sort of a disciplined way for you to scale your company up. But it's all about simplifying, just like the core values, simplifying your strategic initiatives down to 3 to 5 things. and you're focused on a quarterly basis on what are those 3 to 5 things are, and you're getting those things done. And if you're moving the needle on those things, I mean, if Monday you got something going on Monday, don't go take care of it. I really don't care. But if by Thursday we've got to have something done and it's a strategic initiative, it's going to get done. And that's the attitude we got to have. So lots of flexibility, lots of ability to manage your own schedule. You're adults. I don't need you to get my approval for every 30 seconds you're in the office or not in the office. But if you're not raising your hand saying you need help and you're not in the office and something doesn't get done, now we have a little bit of an issue. So my point is, don't mimic me. I have my own method of getting stuff done. I have my own way of getting from A to B. That's not everybody's way. I understand that, and I don't expect you to be me. But that deadline is the deadline. That deliverable is the deliverable. And we got to. If you start compromising on that, then the organization doesn't get anything done.
So I love sports analogies. So I'm going to say, if you're head coach, you want the players to play in their best lane, play in the environment that's going to produce their best results. What's around that you don't necessarily care, as long as it aligns with the culture, but as long as they're able to produce at their highest level, they need to do it the way that they should do it, and you're okay with that.
Absolutely. 100% right. And one of my I'd say coaching idols, even though I wasn't a wrestler, is Dan Gable. And there's some great stories about how he did individualize his coaching. The punishments, they talk about the fact that the punishments for lack of doing something differed between each person, because he knew what motivated each person. The rewards and punishments, but he knew who each, and that's really important. You can't, it's not a cookie cutter. Not everybody's going to think like you. And I think, to your point, Mark, too many managers assume everybody thinks like them, that they're going to get from A to B, and that the only right way to do something is go from A to B the same way. And I think that's a big mistake, because a lot of people are very talented, and they get their different ways.
I love the saying, probably started using this 15 years ago, in an annual review, it was always saying, Jeff, what do you need to be the best version of Jeff? What can I do to help you be? Because everybody's self version, that best version is different. And I may not even know what that is, but I might be able to unlock something to help them get there. And so make sure that you do it. So peanut butter spread approach does not work. I agree. That individualized approach is beautiful. And I think that society needs to do that more, right? Because a lot of management styles are societal expectations of how we think it should be done, but it doesn't have to be such a strict approach. It should be unique to who you are and who your team is, and that can change over time. So
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, I 100% agree with that.
Love this stuff. All right, what's the biggest problem you or your team has solved in the last year?
So the biggest problem we're dealing with and have dealt with is we are a major brand in Asia. We're significant in certain segments. If you own a luxury yacht and have an inboard engine, 80% chance it's ours, right? We dominate some markets and others we don't. But we're a very unknown brand in America, and part of the task here is, how do we grow our market share? How do we grow in certain segments without breaking the bank to do so? And so as we looked at things, the hardest thing was, how do you solve for that? How do you adopt new methods? Can we innovate? Can we disrupt the market? And we think we come up with a formula without sharing too much, but it involves looking at the way the world's changing, which is digital, which is the things that Spinutech does. In fact, we work with Spinutech, but there's opportunities out there if you're willing to look at the different business model. And as we were just talking about, it doesn't just apply to individuals; it applies to companies. There's not just one way to get from A to B. There's not just one way to reach consumers. And in fact, there's ways you can do that in a very effective manner, and gain brand awareness with the specific people that are relevant to your product. And that's been something. First, finding our strategy and our plan, and then convincing everybody here that it works, and that
Yes.
that doing something different And we've gotten there, but this time last year, there were a lot of people looking at us thinking, the senior manager looking, you have no idea what you're doing. And
so I want to dig on this.
Okay.
I want to dig on this a little bit more because this, I think, this is where it draws back to culture. So you're going through somewhat of a digital transformation process. I know this, but the cultural change, it has to happen with that as well. Talk about that if you can.
Sure. So you imagine we're in an industry that's 100 years plus, right? Tractors have been distributed the same way, essentially, through dealers for 100 years. There's a common wisdom amongst people who do this. There's a kind of a recycling of dealers and who sells to whom, and if you get people from outside your company to bring them in, so-called grizzled veterans, they know a way of doing business, and so how do you tell them that the way we're doing it is more of a commodity approach, and you're never going to out-deer a deer, you're never going to out-Kubota a Kubota. So how do we grow against them just doing the same things? And yet they've never seen those things. And it's culturally the same of all the people around them, the support staff and other folks who. So the big thing we did is during the COVID process, I actually copied you, Marc, and started doing a weekly video. And quickly ran out of, I stopped talking all about COVID because it got a little boring. We still encourage people to do the right things and be safe, but we spent a lot of time talking about our strategy. So a lot of time talking about what we want to do and why it's important for us to do it. And then what I think in this Rockefeller habits thing, that very important thing to do is so many times we can all get stuck in talking about what's wrong, what doesn't work in the business. And there's 1,000 things that every day don't work, but how do we talk about what's right? Because we do good stuff. We're moving inch by inch, we're moving the ball forward if you're doing it right. And if you're not recognizing those things on a daily and weekly and monthly basis, people lose sight and everything stinks. And so we started talking about it. And when we have meetings, the first thing we always start with is accomplishments. What did we do different? What did we do that made a difference? What moved the ball forward? And I think as we saw that, and you putting that in the digital context, we started to see uplift. We started to see in our beta tests that doubled the sales growth with people we were applying these digital skills to. That makes an impact. We started our internal call center or concierge team. We started selling product, actually improving the concept. You got to beat that drum when you can and highlight those things so people get on board and say. And then once you have a successful, and what's really interesting globally in our organization, when you do that and you have this positivity around you and they see the positive movement, now we're having a hard time keeping other people away. Everybody wants to be part of this program. Everybody wants a little bit. Now, their vision of what it should look like is a little different and maybe needs to be adjusted, but everybody wants to be part of that positive moment. So it's really taking that and showing people the realm of what could be and proving it out step by step. But the start was, you got to have a fairly strong conviction it's going to work because there's a lot of people telling you won't.
I love the positive, call outs. I always talk about in small town Iowa, there's those schools that just always make it to the state tournament. They always win. It's, they always win. And people are like, why do they always win? Oh, it's the coach. Oh, it's the water over there. It's whatever. But it's also a mentality. It's a mentality that we're winners. And then there's the schools that, they just are always bad. We always beat them. We always kill them. That's because they have the mentality and expectation to lose. And so I think what's been interesting in the last year and a half with COVID is it does feel like we all feel like we're constantly losing, even though there may be a lot of really good things going on. And so we've done the same, try to focus on some of the positives to make sure people don't just get sucked into that muck of negativity and like, oh my gosh, are we failing? Are we losing? No, we're actually doing really well. We're winning, but you do have to call those out. And I think people, it's a good drum to beat. So I applaud you for that as well.
Absolutely. So, an interesting story there. Very similar. So we had, when I was with Briggs & Stratton, we had two factories in China and one in Japan, and the Japanese one was longstanding in a partnership with the Toyota Group, but we had, essentially learned from Toyota and applied a lot of the same quality principles, And so the factory in China that we had that was fairly new was having some quality issues. So I took the quality manager and the plant manager to China with me, to Japan with me, sorry. And we went to the joint venture factory. And after we did the tours and spent a couple of days there, we walked out. And I said, the quality plan's exactly the same. Why do you think the results are different? He goes, well, they actually believe it. So, it's not just a process to follow. They actually believe in what's going on. And that's as you said, if the team doesn't believe it, and they don't see the results from it, then they're just checking the boxes and it's not going to work.
Totally. That's such a great real life example that it really, really proves it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so last few questions here. You mentioned YPO earlier. That's how we know each other. You've been in a long time. You've been very active on the global level. But first of all, just what has YPO meant to you in your professional career?
YPO for the last 12 years, 13 years since I joined in 2010, has been a career accelerator and I'd say a sanity preserver. I joined in Malaysia because I joined a company that was a private equity owned company, but was really a turnaround. I'm in a country I've never been in before. There was, quite honestly, it was what my kids would call a hot mess. And it was a lot of challenges there. And I was navigating a country that's a little hard to understand for an outsider, and there's complexities in the way you do business there that I didn't understand. And so YPO offered a chance to get with people who were willing to share, Malaysians and there was a couple other foreigners in my small group, what we call a forum, but they were willing to share and tell me who's who, what's what, what's real, what's not real. Somebody calls and says, you got to do this, and you call your friend from YPO and say, is that real? Do I have to do that? And that really was a life preserver in the middle of a place. Had that not happened, I would have made a lot more mistakes than I did. And I think that translates into other things. And I've really tried to embrace the broader networking of YPO. And so I was on the executive committee of the Doing Business with China network. I was on the Iowa chapter board for a number of years, and I get involved in a Manufacturers Excellence Network, which is a group of people that get together from around the country that manufacture stuff. All really interesting people, all really great stories, and a lot of them become good friends. But more importantly, they're people who I can ask questions to, and they help me sound intelligent, help me solve problems, help me find resources for those problems. And so I would say, half the consultants I've used in the last 12 years and half the outside service providers have come from recommendations from YPOs or their YPO-owned companies. And so to me, it's been amazing. And I don't think, as you look at it, YPO is great, but there's other networks like that, right? There's other things you can get involved with, but it goes back to what we talked about with my management team. I encourage them to get outside the boundaries of our four walls. I encourage them to get involved in the community and meet people outside of my purview and have your own references, have your own opinion, your own take on things.
And you've done a great job of taking full advantage of YPO, and you mentioned the MXM network, the national forum that you're in, and local forum and international stuff. And that does, I know for myself, it's just expanded my viewpoints. And if you have a problem, there's a YPOer that's been through it already, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to, have sleepless nights. There's multiple people that have been through it, and they can give you a lot of advice quickly that I think you mentioned it earlier. It really kind of cheats time to get to the solution. You don't have to spend all the time in the front. You solve 10% of the problem as opposed to 100% of it with that. So, all right. Is there a question that I did not ask you today that you would love for me to ask or would want me to ask?
I guess, so the question I think that is really important that most times doesn't get asked is, what makes a good manager, right? What makes somebody who's, is there a core essence of that kind of person, to be kind of metaphysical about it, but, share with you we had an interesting opportunity when I was in China. There's hyper competitiveness for Chinese managers who spoke English. So 30% turnover of white collar jobs in 2002 to 2006 or 7. And so how do you keep people? How do you find the right managers? Everybody wanted to be the vice president by the time they hit their 6th month, right? And so how do you sort through that? So what we stumbled across was this consultant who ran a day in the life of managers. So you went into a room and they gave you a email stack that you can't possibly get through. How do you triage that? You have to do a difficult employee role play where the consultants are a difficult employee. You have a mean boss you've got to deal with, or a customer. And a good half of the Chinese internal folks or the applicants said, I don't want to do that. I didn't realize that's a really not fun thing to do on a daily basis. And so how do you put people in a context of, again, there's not one path to get there. There's not a cookie cutter look or, place, but how do you get to know them well enough to know how they react? And so the adage of, whether it be people who you've already hired or people that you're looking to hire, how do you spend enough time for them for the facade to come down and you really see how they would handle themselves in certain situations? Are they a kiss up, kick down person, which is against your culture? Is there something that, in their approach to business that won't work? Those are the things I think that are really important to do. The resumes are great and experience base is great, but if they're not going to fit, and you can't tell that in an hour, you can't tell that in 2 hours.
That's so true. So true. Jeff, thank you. This has been great. It's been insightful. I'm walking away with several tidbits that I'm going to implement with some of our culture crew and team. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I know you're a busy guy like all presidents are of big organizations. So can't thank you enough. That's our podcast for today. Culture Starts With You. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and we'll see you next time.